When my granddaughter told me I was too old for social media, something inside me broke. Not because she was mean, but because I'd already been telling myself I was too old for everything. Too old to learn, too old to matter. Welcome to my channel. I share new life stories here every day, and I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe and liked my video. Now, let's jump back into my story. I'm sure you'll love it if you keep listening till the end. Willa Dawson stood at her kitchen sink, hands trembling as she scrubbed the same plate for the third time. Through the window above the faucet, she could see her grandchildren huddled around the picnic table in her backyard, their faces glowing blue in the late afternoon sun. Not from the sky, but from their phones. 17-year-old Marissa threw her head back laughing at something on her screen, while 14-year-old Camden and 12-year-old Josie leaned in, their shoulders shaking with giggles that didn't include her. Willa had spent all morning making her famous potato salad, the one with the secret pickle juice her late husband Roland used to beg for, and they'd barely touched it. She dried her hands on her apron, the yellow one with faded daisies that Roland bought her 30 years ago, and walked outside, the screen door creaking behind her. The September air smelled like cut grass and charcoal, and somewhere down Maple Street someone was mowing their lawn. "What's got you all so entertained?" Willa asked, settling into the wooden chair beside Marissa, its paint peeling under her fingers. Her granddaughter didn't even look up. Camden snorted, still scrolling. Josie bit her lip, trying not to smile at whatever video was playing. Willa leaned closer, squinting at the bright screen. "Is that a cooking show?" Marissa finally glanced up, her eyes softening with something that looked almost like pity. "Grandma, you're too old for social media," she said, not unkindly, but with the casual certainty of youth. "You wouldn't get it." The words hung in the air like smoke. Camden laughed, a sharp, thoughtless sound, and even Josie giggled behind her hand. Willa's daughter Beth looked up from the grill, her face flushing. "Marissa, that's rude," she said, but her voice was weak, already moving on. The conversation shifted to something else, something about algorithms and filters and viral moments, words that sounded like a foreign language. But Willa stayed frozen in that wooden chair, the peeling paint rough under her palms, feeling 72 years old in a way she never had before. For 40 years she'd stood in front of classrooms full of teenagers, convincing them they could be more than they believed. She'd taught kids like Marissa to write essays, to think critically, to try things that scared them. And now her own granddaughter had just told her she was too old to even try. The laughter continued around her, easy and thoughtless, while something inside Willa's chest cracked open, not with anger, but with something sharper. Loneliness, irrelevance, the terrible feeling of becoming invisible in your own family. That night, after everyone left and the house fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator, Willa sat at her kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea going cold between her hands. The moon threw silver light across the worn linoleum floor, the same floor she and Roland had installed in 1983. She picked up her iPad, the one Beth had given her last Christmas, saying it would help her stay connected, and opened the browser. Her fingers hovered over the screen. Then slowly, deliberately, she typed, "How to record a video." The search results glowed back at her like a dare. Outside, a dog barked. A car passed. And Willa Dawson, retired schoolteacher and invisible grandmother, decided she wasn't done learning yet. 20 years earlier, Willa had stood in front of her 9th grade English class in Millbrook, Indiana, watching a girl named Sarah Jenkins cry silent tears over a failed essay. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in that institutional yellow glow that made teenagers look even more exhausted than they were. Sarah was brilliant but terrified, the kind of student who'd rather fail than try and fall short. Willa had knelt beside her desk, ignoring the ache in her knees, and said something she'd said 1,000 times. Scared means you care, and caring is the first step to becoming. Sarah had looked up with red-rimmed eyes and nodded. 3 years later, she'd been valedictorian. Willa built her entire teaching career on that philosophy. She taught Romeo and Juliet to kids who thought Shakespeare was dead language, and showed them it was really about wanting something so badly you'd risk everything. She taught the crucible to teenagers drowning in peer pressure, helping them see their own lives in John Proctor's Impossible Choices. Every single day for 40 years, Willa walked into that classroom believing that people, especially young people, were capable of more than they knew. And they believed her because she believed in them first, fiercely, without conditions. Her classroom had been a place where scared kids became brave ones. But when Roland died 3 years ago, something in Willa died too. Not her whole self, just the part that felt necessary. Roland had been her partner in everything, grading papers at the kitchen table, chaperoning dances, hosting debate team meetings in their living room. He'd been the one who encouraged her to retire at 69, saying they'd finally travel, see the ocean, eat lobster in Maine. They'd managed one trip to Mackinac Island before the heart attack. After the funeral, Willa's children, Beth, Marcus, and David, had been attentive for a while, calling twice a week, visiting on Sundays. But life pulled them back. Jobs, kids, mortgages. Willa understood, she did, but understanding didn't make the house less quiet. The grandchildren visited less and less. They were teenagers now, with their own friends and dramas and digital lives that moved too fast for her to follow. When they did come over, they barely looked up from their screens. Willa would make elaborate meals, her famous fried chicken, homemade biscuits, cherry pie from scratch, and they'd eat quickly, politely, before disappearing back into their devices. She'd try to ask about school, about their interests, but the answers came in shrugs and, "It's fine, Grandma." She wasn't part of their world anymore. She was just the old woman in the background, making food they didn't ask for, telling stories they'd heard before. Sitting at her kitchen table that September night, Willa thought about Sarah Jenkins and all the other students she'd pushed to try. She thought about the girl in 1987 who said she couldn't write poetry, then won a state competition. The boy in 1995 who said he hated reading, then devoured Steinbeck. The quiet girl in 2003 who finally raised her hand after Willa waited, patient and expectant, until she did. Willa had spent decades teaching one fundamental truth: you're capable of more than you think. And now, alone in her kitchen with cold tea and wounded pride, she realized she'd stopped believing that about herself. Marissa's words, "You're too old," had only confirmed what Willa had secretly feared: that her useful years were over, that she was invisible now, forgettable. The iPad screen glowed too bright in the dark kitchen. Willa squinted at the tutorial video. A young woman with perfect skin explaining how to use TikTok like it was the simplest thing in the world. "Just press the plus button," the girl chirped, her voice sugary with enthusiasm. Willa pressed the plus button. The camera flipped to show her own face, and she nearly dropped the iPad. When had she gotten so old? The woman staring back had deep lines around her eyes, silver hair that needed washing, and a tired expression that made her look defeated. This was a mistake. She should just go to bed, forget about Marissa's comment, stop being so sensitive. But then she thought about Sarah Jenkins again, about standing at the front of a classroom, asking scared kids to try anyway. Willa had never accepted "I can't" as a complete sentence. She'd push and prod and wait with stubborn patience until they tried. So why was she accepting it from herself now? She propped the iPad against the sugar canister, pressed the red record button, and watched the countdown. 3, 2, 1. Her mouth went dry. "Hello," she said, her voice raspier than she'd expected. She cleared her throat. "I'm Willa. I'm 72, and I want to learn something new today." 12 seconds. That's all it was. 12 seconds of an old woman talking to nobody. Posting it felt even scarier than recording it. She had to create an account, username, at Grandma Willa 72, because her first choice was taken, and then figure out hashtags, which felt like trying to decode a secret language. The tutorial video said to use relevant tags, so she typed hashtag grandmas of TikTok, hashtag never too old, hashtag learning new things, her fingers slow and uncertain on the screen. Then she hovered over the post button, her heart racing like she was 17 again, about to take her driver's test. This was ridiculous. Who would even see it? But she pressed post anyway, because Willa Dawson had spent 40 years teaching kids to be brave, and cowardice at 72 seemed like a poor way to end that legacy. She woke at 5:47 a.m. to pale sunlight filtering through her bedroom curtains, the same curtains she and Roland had hung in 1979. For a moment she lay still, listening to the house settle around her, the creak of old wood, the distant hum of the refrigerator, the absolute silence that had become her constant companion. Then she remembered the video. Her stomach dropped. She reached for the iPad on her nightstand, her reading glasses, and opened TikTok with one eye closed, half expecting to see 0 views and maybe 1 comment from a bot. The screen loaded. The numbers didn't make sense at first. 47,000 views, 3,200 likes, 847 comments. Willa blinked, refreshed. The numbers grew. 48,000 views now. Her hands shook as she scrolled through the comments. "You inspired me to try too," wrote a woman named Dorothy, 68. "My kids tell me I'm too old for everything. Thank you for showing us we're not," wrote Linda May, 1952. "I'm 71 and I just downloaded this app because of you," wrote another. There were hundreds more, women her age, older, some younger, all saying variations of the same thing. They felt invisible, dismissed, too old to matter. And Willa's simple 12-second video, filmed in her dark kitchen with unwashed hair and a tired face, had somehow told them they weren't. She sat up in bed, the morning light turning everything soft and golden, and started reading every single comment. For the first time in 3 years, Willa Dawson felt necessary again. By noon, the video had 127,000 views. Willa kept refreshing the screen, unable to believe the numbers. She'd made toast for breakfast, but forgot to eat it. She'd poured coffee, but let it go cold. All she could do was read comments from strangers who felt like friends, women sharing stories of being told they were too old to learn technology, to start hobbies, to try new things. One woman wrote that her daughter had taken away her smartphone, saying it was too complicated for her. Another said she hadn't felt seen by her family in years. The comments weren't just about social media. They were about dignity, about being dismissed and underestimated and treated like relics instead of people. Willa made a second video that afternoon, this time with better lighting. She'd pulled back the kitchen curtains and positioned herself by the window where the September sun streamed in gold and warm. She wore her good blue cardigan, the one Beth had given her for her birthday, and she'd brushed her hair. "Thank you for all your kind words," she said, speaking slower this time, more deliberately. "I'm learning that too old is just something people say when they've stopped trying. But we're not done yet, are we?" She smiled, and it was genuine. The first real smile she'd felt since Marissa's comment. She posted it with the caption, "Day 2 of learning. Who's with me?" That video got 200,000 views in 6 hours. Messages flooded in, not just from older women, but from their children, apologizing for dismissing their mothers and grandmothers. From younger people saying Willa reminded them of someone they loved. From men in their 60s and 70s saying they felt invisible too. Willa sat at her kitchen table, the same table where she'd graded thousands of essays, where she and Roland had shared 45 years of dinners, and she felt something she hadn't felt in years, purpose. Not the borrowed purpose of being someone's grandmother or someone's widow, but her own purpose, something that was hers. She was teaching again, not Romeo and Juliet, but something maybe more important. That you don't disappear just because people stop seeing you. Saturday arrived bright and cool, the kind of October morning that smells like apples and dying leaves. Willa was filming her 5th video, this one about her mother's recipe for apple butter, something she made every fall, when she heard car doors slam in the driveway. Then voices, her children's voices, Beth's laugh, Marcus's deep rumble. She set down the iPad and walked to the front door, wiping her hands on her apron. They were all there, Beth, Marcus, David, and all 5 grandchildren, standing on her porch, looking stunned. "Grandma," Marissa said, her phone in her hand, her eyes wide, "you're going viral." They crowded into her kitchen, everyone talking at once. Marcus pulled up her videos on his phone, showing her the view counts. 500,000, 750,000. One had crossed 1 million. Beth kept saying, "Mom, why didn't you tell us?" But her eyes were shining with something like pride. The grandchildren were different now, actually looking at her, not through her. Camden asked how she edited her videos. Josie wanted to know if she'd replied to any comments. And Marissa, beautiful, thoughtless Marissa, who'd called her too old a week ago, sat beside her at the kitchen table and said, "Grandma, can you teach me how to be like you?" Willa looked around her kitchen, filled with family for the first time in months, and realized something. She hadn't just proved them wrong. She'd reminded them she was still here. Within 2 weeks, Willa had posted 23 videos and gained 400,000 followers. She filmed herself making Roland's favorite beef stew, explaining how she'd learned the recipe from his mother in 1974. She showed viewers her garden, the tomato plants heavy with late-season fruit, the herbs she'd been growing for decades, the rose bushes Roland had planted for their anniversary. She talked about loneliness in a way that felt honest instead of pitiful, about losing your partner and learning to live in the space they left behind. People commented, saying they'd lost someone too, that they understood, that watching Willa cook and garden and simply exist made them feel less alone. The videos that resonated most were the simplest ones. Willa teaching people how to darn socks, because throwing things away feels wasteful when you grew up during harder times. Willa showing her system for organizing recipes, index cards in a wooden box, some so old the handwriting had faded to ghosts. Willa talking about marriage, about the fights she and Roland had, the compromises, the way love changes shape over 45 years but doesn't disappear. Young women commented, saying they were saving these videos for when they got older. Middle-aged daughters tagged their mothers, and older women, so many older women, said thank you, just thank you, over and over, for making them feel visible again. But it wasn't all easy. Willa's son Marcus worried she was doing too much, that the attention might be too stressful for someone her age. Beth kept asking if she needed help, if this was all getting overwhelming, speaking to her in that careful voice people use with fragile things. Even David, usually the most laid back of her children, suggested she take it easy, not push yourself so hard. Willa understood their concern. It came from love, but it also stung. They still saw her as someone who needed protecting, someone whose capacity for life had shrunk to the size of her quiet house. They didn't understand that making these videos wasn't exhausting. It was the opposite. It was life. The grandchildren, though, they got it. Marissa started coming over twice a week to help Willa film and edit. She taught her grandmother how to add music, how to use transitions, how to read analytics. Camden suggested video ideas. "Grandma, tell the story about teaching during the blizzard of '78. Josie helped her respond to comments, reading them aloud and helping Willa craft replies. For the first time since Roland died, Willa's house felt full, not just with people, but with laughter, with purpose, with the particular energy that comes from creating something together. Her family was learning who she was again, Not just Grandma, not just Mum, but Willa, a whole person. One evening in late October, as Marissa helped Willa film a video about making homemade bread, the girl paused and looked at her grandmother with something new in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "for what I said at the cookout, about you being too old." Willa set down the mixing bowl, flour dusting her hands and the front of her apron. "Oh, honey," she said, pulling Marissa into a hug that smelled like yeast and vanilla. "You didn't do anything I hadn't already been telling myself." And that was the truth, wasn't it? Marissa's comment had hurt because Willa had already believed it. But now, with 400,000 people watching her knead bread and talk about patience, she was learning something she'd taught for 40 years but had forgotten. You're never too old to begin again. Willa's follower count hit 750,000 on a grey November morning. She was filming a video about her favorite thrift store finds: a Depression-era glass bowl, a 1960s cookbook, a wooden rolling pin that had outlasted 3 generations, when a message notification appeared at the top of her screen. Usually she ignored messages while filming, but something made her stop. The preview read, "You saved my life." Her hands went still on the rolling pin. She set down the iPad camera and opened her messages, her heart suddenly loud in her ears. The message was from a woman named Eleanor. No profile picture, no other information, just words. "Dear Willa," it began, "I'm 68 years old. My husband died 8 months ago. I haven't left my house since the funeral except to buy groceries. I stopped answering the phone. I stopped seeing friends. I stopped doing anything except sitting in his chair and waiting to disappear. Then last week, my daughter showed me your videos. The one about making beef stew, about cooking for one after cooking for 2 for so long. I watched it 3 times. Then I watched everything else you'd posted. Yesterday, I got out of bed before noon for the first time in months. I made the beef stew. I ate it at the kitchen table instead of in front of the TV. This morning, I called my daughter back. I don't know if you understand what you've done, but you helped me remember I'm still here. Thank you." Willa read the message 5 times, tears blurring the words. She thought about Eleanor, a stranger sitting in her dead husband's chair, drowning in grief so deep it looked like the only way out. She thought about her own grief after Roland, how some days the silence in the house felt like it would swallow her whole. How she'd sit at the kitchen table at 3 a.m., unable to sleep, wondering if this was all that was left, empty rooms and memories. Eleanor's message made something crack open in Willa's chest, not pain, but recognition. She wasn't just making videos about cooking and gardening. She was showing people that you could survive the unsurvivable, that you could lose everything and still find reasons to get up. She closed the filming app and opened the camera again, but this time she wasn't thinking about content or followers or editing. She looked directly into the lens and spoke from somewhere deeper than usual. "Today I got a message from someone who was hurting," Willa said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "And she told me that watching an old woman make beef stew helped her want to live again. I don't know what to do with that except say, if you're hurting, if you're lonely, If you've lost someone and don't know how to keep going, I see you. You're not invisible. You're not too old or too broken or too far gone. You're still here, and that matters. She posted it without editing, without music, without anything but the truth. The video went viral in a way nothing else had. Within 24 hours, 2.3 million views, 15,000 comments, people sharing their own losses, their own loneliness, their own stories of feeling forgotten. News outlets picked it up, local Indiana stations first, then regional, then a segment on a national morning show about the grandmother who'd become a voice for forgotten seniors. Journalists called her house. Her phone rang constantly. Beth and Marcus wanted to hire someone to manage this, to protect her from the attention. But Willa didn't need protecting. She needed to keep going, because somewhere out there, Eleanor was making beef stew, and somewhere else, another lonely person was watching Willa's videos and deciding to stay. December brought snow to Millbrook, the kind of heavy, wet snow that clung to tree branches and made everything look like a postcard. Willa filmed herself making Christmas cookies, the same recipes she'd made for 40 years. Sugar cookies with buttercream frosting, gingerbread men with raisin buttons, Russian tea cakes that melted in your mouth. She talked about holiday traditions, about how Roland used to burn the Christmas ham every single year, and they'd laugh and order pizza instead. She showed viewers her ornament collection, each one with a story. The paper snowflake Marcus made in 2nd grade, the porcelain angel from their first Christmas as a married couple, the tiny schoolhouse ornament her students had given her when she retired. Her follower count passed 1 million. The messages kept coming, hundreds a day now. Women who'd started cooking again after years of not bothering. Men who'd called their adult children for the first time in months. People who'd adopted her philosophy of, "You're never too old," and applied it to everything. Learning piano, going back to school, starting businesses, leaving bad marriages, making peace with estranged family. Willa couldn't respond to everyone, but she tried. She'd spend hours at her kitchen table, reading stories and typing replies, her fingers slow on the iPad screen, but her heart full. This was teaching again. Different subject, different classroom, but the same core truth. People needed someone to believe in them. The local news station did a feature on her. They sent a reporter and cameraman to her house, filmed her making pie crust and talking about her teaching career. "What do you think about being a viral sensation at 72? The reporter asked, a young woman with perfect makeup and an eager smile. Willa considered the question, rolling out dough with her grandmother's wooden rolling pin. "I think," she said finally, "that we spend too much time telling people what they can't do, especially as they get older. But age doesn't make you useless. It makes you experienced, and experience is worth something." The segment aired that evening. By morning, it had been shared 50,000 times. But the most meaningful moment came when Sarah Jenkins, the girl who'd cried over her failed essay 20 years ago, sent Willa a message on Facebook. "Mrs. Dawson," it read, "I saw your TikTok videos. I'm a teacher now, 9th grade English, and I tell my students the same thing you told me. Scared means you care. I show them your videos as proof that it's never too late to be brave. You changed my life when I was 14, and you're still changing lives now. Thank you for never stopping. Willa sat at her kitchen table, snow falling outside the window, and cried. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming sense that her life had meant something, that the 40 years in the classroom hadn't ended when she retired. They'd just changed form. Christmas arrived with the house full in a way it hadn't been since Roland died. All her children, all her grandchildren, Beth's husband, Marcus's wife, David's boyfriend, everyone crammed into her small living room, drinking cocoa and eating cookies and filming videos with Grandma Willa. Marissa had become her unofficial videographer, suggesting shots and angles and teaching Willa about trends. Camden wrote captions. Josie managed her comment section. They weren't helping out of pity anymore. They were helping because they were proud. Because Grandma Willa wasn't just the old woman who made potato salad. She was someone important, someone who mattered, someone who taught them all that age was just a number, not a limit. January brought cold that settled into Willa's bones and made her arthritis flare. Some mornings her hands hurt too much to hold the iPad steady. Beth noticed and suggested, gently, carefully, that maybe Willa should slow down, take a break, not push herself so hard. "Mom, you've done so much already," she said over coffee one afternoon, her voice full of that careful concern that made Willa feel ancient. No one would blame you for stepping back. But Willa wasn't interested in stepping back. The messages still came. People still needed to hear that they mattered. And her hands might hurt, but they still worked. She'd taught with pneumonia once. She could film videos with arthritis. She started a new series, Letters to My Younger Self. Each video she'd address a different age, 20-year-old Willa, 30-year-old Willa, 40-year-old Willa, and tell her things she wished she'd known. "Dear 30-year-old Willa," she said in one video, speaking directly to the camera with morning light soft on her face. "You're going to think you're falling apart when your second baby won't stop crying, and your first one just started kindergarten, and your husband is working 2 jobs. You're not falling apart. You're holding everything together, and that's not the same thing." Women in their 30s commented, saying they needed to hear that they were drowning and felt invisible in their own lives. Another video. "Dear 50-year-old Willa, you're going to watch your last child leave for college and feel like your purpose just drove away in a blue Honda Civic. But your purpose doesn't live in your children. It lives in you, and you're not done yet." Mothers whose kids had left home shared the video thousands of times. Another. "Dear 60-year-old Willa, you're going to lose your mother this year, and your husband is going to get sick, not the heart attack that kills him, but sick enough to scare you. You're going to feel like time is running out, but time doesn't run out. It just changes shape. Hold on." People who'd lost parents, who were watching loved ones age, who felt the panic of mortality closing in, they understood. The videos resonated because Willa wasn't pretending life was easy or that age brought automatic wisdom. She talked about her mistakes, the time she yelled at Marcus for something small because she was overwhelmed, the year she and Roland barely spoke because they'd forgotten how to be anything except parents, the depression after she retired that made her sleep 14 hours a day. She talked about feeling invisible at grocery stores, at doctor's offices, in her own family, before TikTok. Older women become ghosts, she said in one video. Not because we disappear, but because people stop seeing us. And I'm here to tell you, we're still here, we're still whole, we're still worth knowing. That video got 3 million views. By February, Willa had 1.8 million followers. News outlets called her an unlikely influencer and a voice for forgotten seniors. But Willa didn't think of herself as an influencer. She thought of herself as a teacher who'd found a classroom bigger than she'd ever imagined. Every video was a lesson, not about English literature, but about living, about surviving loss, about finding purpose after everyone tells you you're done, about refusing to become invisible just because the world prefers young faces. And the students, millions of them now, were learning. They were getting out of bed. They were calling their mothers. They were trying new things despite their fear. They were beginning again. March arrived with the kind of rain that turns everything to mud. Willa was filming a video about starting seedlings for her spring garden when her phone rang. Not a notification, but an actual call. She almost didn't answer. Journalists had gotten her number somehow, and she was tired of explaining why a 72-year-old woman on social media was newsworthy. But the area code was local. She pressed pause on the video and answered. "Is this Willa Dawson?" a woman's voice asked, shaky and uncertain. "Yes," Willa said. "Who's calling?" There was a long pause. Then, "My name is Eleanor. I sent you a message in November about the beef stew." Willa's heart stopped. Eleanor, the woman who'd been sitting in her dead husband's chair, waiting to disappear. "Oh, honey," Willa said, sinking into her kitchen chair, the phone pressed to her ear. "How are you?" Eleanor laughed, and it sounded rusty, like she hadn't used it in a while. "I'm calling you," she said. "That's something, isn't it? I couldn't make phone calls for 8 months. But I wanted to tell you, I'm out of the chair, Willa. I'm not okay yet, but I'm trying. I joined a grief support group. I started volunteering at the library. I made your apple butter recipe last week. It turned out terrible, but I made it." She laughed again, and this time it sounded easier. "You saved my life. I needed you to know that, really know it." They talked for an hour. Eleanor told her about her husband. His name was Thomas. He'd loved crossword puzzles and hated olives. They'd been married 43 years. She told Willa about the silence after he died, how it felt like drowning in air, how his chair sat empty, but she couldn't bring herself to sit anywhere else, how watching Willa cook and garden and simply exist had been the first thing that made her think maybe she could exist too. "You weren't pretending it was easy," Eleanor said. "You just showed me it was possible." When they finally hung up, Willa sat in her kitchen with tears on her face and understood something she'd been circling for months. This wasn't about social media or going viral. or proving her grandkids wrong. This was about purpose. For 40 years, she'd had purpose built into her life. Teach the children, grade the papers, show up every day and make them better. Then Roland died and she retired, and the purpose disappeared like smoke. She'd been searching for it ever since, in her grandchildren's visits, in her garden, in the empty rooms of her house. But it had found her instead, in the form of an iPad and a comment section full of people who needed to hear that they mattered. Willa realized she'd been given something rare, a second act. Not everyone got one. Most people her age were being managed and monitored, told to slow down, treated like their useful years were behind them. But here she was at 72, teaching millions. Still necessary, still whole. That night she made a video different from all the others. She didn't talk about recipes or gardening or memories. She looked directly into the camera and said, "Someone asked me recently if I ever imagined my life would look like this at 72. The answer is no. I thought I'd be sitting in an empty house, waiting for holidays, becoming someone my grandchildren remembered but didn't really know. I thought my teaching days were over. I thought my purpose was behind me. But here's what I've learned. You're never too old to begin again. Your life can change at 72, at 82, at 92. You are not done until you decide you're done. And I'm not done yet." She posted it with shaking hands and the caption, "Never too old." By morning, it had 5 million views. Spring came to Millbrook in shades of green and yellow. Willa's garden exploded with life. Tomato plants climbing their cages, lettuce bright in neat rows. The rose bushes Roland planted, blooming pink and white. She filmed it all, her followers watching as she planted and pruned and harvested. But she also filmed the quiet moments, morning coffee on the back porch, watching birds at the feeder Roland had built, sitting in the kitchen at the table where they'd shared 45 years of meals. "Grief doesn't end," she told her 2 million followers. "You just learn to carry it differently, and some days it weighs less than others." The family dynamics had shifted in ways Willa never expected. Her children stopped treating her like she was fragile. They asked her opinion on things, not just to be polite, but because they valued her insight. The grandchildren visited not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Marissa was applying to colleges now, and she'd asked Willa to help edit her essay. Camden wanted to learn how to cook, so Willa was teaching him her recipes, filming the lessons for her channel. Josie had started her own TikTok account, teaching kids her age about respecting their grandparents. They'd become a team, all of them, working together in a way they never had when Willa was just grandma in the background. Beth pulled Willa aside one Sunday afternoon in April, tears in her eyes. "Mom, I'm sorry," she said. "I'm sorry we made you feel invisible. I'm sorry we didn't see you." Willa hugged her daughter tight, breathing in her familiar smell of lavender shampoo and coffee. "You're seeing me now," she said. "That's what matters." And it was true. Her family had rediscovered her, not as the woman who made holiday dinners and babysat when needed, but as Willa, a whole person with thoughts and dreams and things left to do. They'd stopped managing her and started learning from her, and that shift had healed something Willa didn't even know was broken. In May, Willa received an invitation to speak at a women's conference in Indianapolis about aging, purpose, and digital connection. She almost said no. The idea of standing in front of hundreds of people terrified her in a way standing in front of teenagers never had. But Marissa convinced her. "Grandma, you've been teaching people for 50 years. This is just a bigger classroom." So Willa went, wearing her best dress and her yellow daisy apron over it, because that's who she was, a teacher and a grandmother who'd learned to bloom late. She told Eleanor's story, with permission, and her own. She talked about the moment Marissa called her too old, and how it stung because she'd already believed it. How one 12-second video changed everything. The audience, mostly women over 50, gave her a standing ovation that lasted 3 minutes. Afterward, dozens of them waited in line to hug her, to cry with her, to tell her they'd felt invisible too until they saw her videos. One woman, 84 years old and using a walker, grabbed Willa's hand and said, "I'm starting a YouTube channel next week about quilting because of you." Willa cried then, standing in that conference hall, surrounded by women who'd been told they were done, but were deciding to begin again. This was why she'd kept making videos, even when her hands hurt. This was why it mattered. Not the follower count or the viral moments, but this, giving people permission to keep living. That evening, back in her kitchen, with the April sun turning everything gold through the window, Willa set up her iPad one more time. She'd been thinking about what to say all day, turning the words over in her mind like smooth stones. She pressed record and looked into the camera, not at millions of followers, but at the one person who might need to hear this today. When my granddaughter told me I was too old for social media, something inside me broke, she said, her voice steady and sure. Not because she was mean, but because I'd already been telling myself I was too old for everything. Too old to learn, too old to matter, too old to begin again. She paused, choosing her words carefully, the way she'd done for 40 years in front of classrooms full of kids who needed to believe in themselves. But here's what I know now. You're never too old to begin again. Your life can change at 72, at 82, at 92. The world will tell you you're invisible, that your best years are behind you, that you should step aside and make room for younger, better, more relevant people. But you don't have to listen. You're still here. You still matter. You're still whole. And if an old woman in Indiana can learn TikTok and touch millions of lives, then you can do whatever it is you've been telling yourself you're too old to try. She smiled then, the same smile she'd given scared students for decades, the one that said, "I believe in you, even when you don't believe in yourself." So here's my challenge. Do one thing today that scares you. Record a video. Call someone you miss. Start that project you've been putting off. Plant a garden. Learn something new. Write that book. Whatever it is, do it. Because you're not done yet. None of us are done until we decide we're done. And I'm not done. Are you? She let the question hang in the air for a moment, then reached forward and pressed stop. She posted it with shaking hands and a full heart. The caption read simply, "You're never too old to begin again." By the next morning, the video had 8 million views. But more importantly, the comments were filled with people sharing what they'd started. Painting classes, piano lessons, businesses, books, gardens, conversations with estranged children, applications to college at 67. Eleanor commented, "I'm taking a pottery class. My hands are clumsy and my pots are crooked, but I'm making them. Thank you, Willa." Sarah Jenkins commented, "Still teaching us, Mrs. Dawson. Still changing lives." And Marissa, beautiful, thoughtless Marissa, who'd accidentally changed everything with one careless comment, wrote, "Grandma, you're the bravest person I know. Thank you for showing me what it means to never give up." Willa sat at her kitchen table, the same table where she'd graded papers and eaten dinners and cried after Roland died, and she felt something she hadn't felt in years, complete. Not because she'd proved anyone wrong, or because millions of people watched her videos, but because she'd found her purpose again, the same purpose she'd always had, just in a different form. She was still teaching, still showing people they were capable of more than they knew, still believing in them when they couldn't believe in themselves. And at 72 years old, in a small house in Indiana, Willa Dawson had learned the most important lesson of all. You're never too old to begin again. The world might call you invisible, but that just means they're not looking close enough, because you're still here, still whole, still necessary, still teaching, still learning, still beginning, and that's everything. I'm really glad you watched till the end. If you liked my story, show me by liking the video and subscribing to my channel. Write in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is. I'm so curious to know where all you wonderful people are tuning in from.